there guys, welcome back to I Can't Witch Without, the series in which we look at a different item each week, which I use regularly within my practice. As always, a disclaimer at the start of this video, it's not to say that any particular item is essential to being a witch. It's not what the series is about. The series is just taking a look at different items, their energies, how I incorporate them, and being part of a witchy path. So this week we are looking at Hazel. We shifted into the Celtic tree calendar month of Hazel as of yesterday. I for one was relieved. I don't know what it is about the holly month, but every year I seem to have problems with the holly month. It seems to be a very stressful energy. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's the time of year. So what we do with the I Can't Witch Without series is we look at two reference sources, and those are the Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs and then the Paul Barrel Herbal Compendium, and read from those two sources. I think it's important to have a baseline to start each video. It helps get the words flowing, get the ideas flowing, and then we talk about how I feel about it, and we will have a look at some spell work to do with Hazel in the other video, the Working Witch video. So from Cunningham's Encyclopedia, Hazel is given as masculine, associated with Sun, Air, Mercury, Thor, Artemis and Diana. It has powers of luck, fertility, anti-lightning, protection and wishes. Magical uses: string the nuts and hang in the house for good luck, or present a batch of them to a bride to wish her good fortune. The nuts eaten give wisdom and fertility. They are often eaten prior to divination. They can be carried for increasing fertility. To protect yourself or plants while outdoors, draw a circle in the dirt with a witch twig made of hazel. Weave hazel twigs into a crown. Put this on your head and wish very hard. Your wish may come true. Hazel crowns were also worn to induce invisibility. Twigs of hazel are placed in window frames, I want to say willow frames then, window frames to guard the house against lightning, and 3 pins of hazelwood driven into your house will protect it from fire. Hazelwood can be used to make fine all-purpose magical wands. The forked branches are utilised by dowsers to divine hidden objects. Okay. And then from the Herbal Compendium, which actually gives hazel nut, but not hazel wood. Herb of love, magical herb, visionary herb. The hazel has been associated with a poetic inspiration. Hazel is Col, the 9th letter, or the letter C in the tree alphabet. Graves writes in A White Goddess that the nut in Celtic legend is always an emblem of concentrated wisdom. Also, according to Graves, the fork hazel branch was once used for dowsing. He describes a custom in which hazel may be given as a token of romance, so that the romance may proceed. Corresponds with the planet Mercury and sometimes considered the herb of Wednesday, which is when the month of Hazel actually began. So there you go. Right. So from a Ogham divinational perspective, it is said to mean ancestral wisdom, inspiration, a state of enlightenment. Known as the food of the gods, hazelnuts served as a food source for the ancient Celts. The otherworldly well of wisdom was surrounded by 9 trees. The nuts fell into the well and were eaten by the salmon who lived there. It was believed that anyone who ate the salmon of wisdom was gifted with great knowledge. This passing on of knowledge from tree to salmon to man can indicate a period of learning. Col wisdom includes times of apprenticeships, or could indicate ancestral wisdom. Wands made from hazel were used in magic to manifest wishes and desires, and such wands were known as wishing rods. It is linked to creative energies and goddess energies. used in manifesting wishes, desires, and seeking wisdom. Okay, we're also going to read a bit from the Glennie Kindred book because I think the information is a little bit sparse with regards to Hazel in the herb compendium. Interestingly enough, she claimed that there was no herbal association, herbal uses for Hazel. So there you go. So this is Glennie Kindred's Earth Wisdom, which I highly recommend you get. There is a review on the channel. If you are interested in earth-based things, there is a lot about the trees in this particular book. So we've already heard about the Celtic well. The nuts represent sweetness and nourishment, hidden but potent. Their symbolism is hidden wisdom and are associated with the maiden aspect of the triple goddess who brings fertility, poetry and creativity. If you find 2 nuts in a shell, this is considered to be lucky. Eat one for inspiration and return the other to the earth. Hazel represents the source of creativity and was honoured as a tree that brought fertility to the intuition. Silver snakes of knowledge are said to twine around its roots. I just think that was interesting. The hazelnuts contain the wisdom of the tree, reminding us to look within, to follow our heart and inner wisdom as well as our rational mind. Helps us find inspired creative solutions, bringing ideas to the surface so that we can take action and move with the change. It's a tree of communication through the spark of intuition. It brings healing to the split between our conscious and unconscious minds, between our inner and outer worlds. It opens the interface between two and allows for intuition and inspiration to be available readily in our lives. The visions we act upon will change our future and transform our present. Hazel was once a valuable element in rural economy, with coppice woodland providing wood for a great variety of uses. The long roots that grow from the base of the tree provide a quantity of straight poles that are long and flexible when they are fresh. Since prehistoric times, hazel rods have been woven into a variety of useful products, such as panels used in the building technique known as wattle and daub. The hazel panels were placed between oak posts, forming the frame of a house, which was then daubed with a mixture of mud and straw and finished off with whitewash, used today as hurdles to pen sheep and for garden fencing. Inside the house they can be used to make an attractive screen, used in handles in basket work. So on and so forth. Working with hazel brings the inspiration of Brigid, the maiden goddess of home and hearth. This creates a connection between our healing work and our daily routines. Healing needs to be rooted in our everyday lives, in the ordinary things we do, in the way we interact with everything that touches our heart on a day-to-day basis. It facilitates deep listening, the receiving of impressions from the land, the trees, ourselves and other people. We can translate these into thoughts, words, art, music, song or poetry or creative acts, so that we understand the wisdom we are subconsciously receiving. Hazel brings the flame of inspiration and the active force of the vital spirit as it joins with our nature intuitive abilities. Right. Okay. So I think a lot of it might well be that the feeling of relief that came when the hazel energy shifted into gear is that the holly tin energies are quite rigid and quite sort of barbed and quite sort of not aggressive but a little bit hostile, and whereas there were some very interesting lessons to be learnt about barrier work and hedge work in the month of tin for sure, which I found thrilling and really interesting, I was super relieved when the energy shifted, incredibly relieved. I felt lighter, I felt more creative, I felt more inspired. I felt like my energy began to flow again rather than being up against a brick wall and up against obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And so once Hazel sort of shifted in, it was like this huge sigh of relief It's like, oh, thank goodness. So I was really relieved to feel the energies of Hazel quite so strongly, and I really wanted to talk a little bit about the Hazel tree and Hazel magic as a result. My first real contact with Hazel energy, and the energy that really seemed to flow to the front when I initially engaged with the Ogham, was very much about this idea of wishing and the idea of wishes. And it's very interesting about how human culture has almost created this storyline associated with wishes and things that our hearts desire, to the point where we have cultural symbols that initially were probably by region, but today span the world. So I think the one that's going to be associated with England is going to be the wishing well, whereas like the idea of the genie in the lamp comes from Arabian Nights and things of that nature. So in regards to the wishing well, that is a modern cultural sort of digression from the well of wisdom in the Celtic tradition. The well of wisdom, of course, is where the salmon of knowledge I don't know why that makes me laugh every time. The salmon of knowledge, it does, lived in Celtic lore, and he ate from the hazelnuts that fell into the water from the 9 hazel trees that surrounded the well. And you have some very interesting sort of numerology going on there, as well as some symbolism there, which I think is fascinating. And from that comes the wishing well, dropping coin in the wishing well and making a wish and your wish coming true, which also ties back to the Celtic tradition of leaving offerings, including coins, to the gods in bodies of water, because bodies of water were believed to be gateways between this world and the other world to the realm of the gods. And it's not just coins, swords and all sorts of offerings, including food, were placed in water because water was believed to be a spiritual conduit of carrying offerings to the gods, to the realm of the gods. So there's this incredible sort of tying in of wishes and like pleading to the gods for things to be provided. And wish magic sort of then takes on this very magical element, if you ask me, because not only is it a sort of prayer to the gods or a sort of supplication, I guess, a sort of asking for something. It's a desire and a need, and then there is an act involved in all of this with regards to putting your own energy into something. So it becomes a form of witchcraft, it becomes a form of magic. The act of placing a penny in a well and making a wish on it is in a lot of ways exactly like a witch casting a spell. There is a physical item on which you are placing your energy and your intention and your desire and your need. So you're holding onto your coin and you're wishing and wishing and wishing for that thing that you really, really want, and you're picturing it in your mind as you getting that thing and why you need that thing, and putting all that need into the spell. And then the placing of the coin into the water is a symbolic act based on history of cultural referencing, whether you know it or not, and placing it in that body of water, the realm of water, the realm of the emotion, but also the realm between this world and the other world of the gods. And it becomes a spell work, and it's not surprising to me that Hazel has become intricately linked with a lot of witchcraft and magic and wishing. Because of this, it sort of becomes this process that flows, that initially they were associated with wisdom, and that becomes associated with the water and the well and the knowledge. And that's another thing that really makes me think that Hazel is quite intimately linked to witchcraft. A lot of people who sort of debate the origin of the word Wicca and witch sometimes argue that it is associated with those being wise. There is a debate that rages around whether or not this is where the etymology of the word comes from. But however, I think wisdom is a very noble pursuit, and is a pursuit of witches. They wish to have the knowledge and wisdom of their forebearers, of their forefathers, of their ancestors, of the world around them, connect with the nature and the deva and the gods and goddesses and the spirits of things, all in a quest of learning and knowledge, seeking to be a bit wiser tomorrow than we are today. I think that's a very noble pursuit. It can get twisted in some places, but I think in its pure form, the idea is very noble and very magical. I like the idea of the salmon being wise as well, because it's actually rooted in fact that if you eat fish, it actually helps the brain. I forgot what it's actually called. Oh, the stuff in fish that help. Oh, is it omega acids in fish? I think it's. If I'm wrong, correct me. Someone will correct me. But it's part of a healthy lifestyle, as are nuts, and nuts get a really bad rep because they're high in a lot of fats, but properly eaten, they're good for you. Like, not necessarily the way that they are administered a lot of the time today in supermarkets full of salt and sugar, but you know, naturally collected nuts, wow, that's a tongue twister apparently, can be part of a really healthy diet. Right, so in terms of healing, I think it's really, really interesting. So it's the idea that we create our health in terms of healing, we create our energy in terms of what we are doing and how we are expressing ourselves or not. And Hazel has this really interesting dynamic that is basically, you know, you need to incorporate everything every day, and you need to make it habit and routine, but you need to find the joy in that, so it doesn't become boring, it doesn't become rigid, because Hazel is not rigid as far as energy goes. Like, the comparison between it and Holly is crazy, and I think that it gets me every year, because Holly to me feels restrictive and rigid, whereas Hazel is like, no, we're going to move into the water element, we're going to flow, we're going to learn, we're going to get in touch with our intuition, we're going to create, we're going to get in touch with who we are through song, through history, through story, through art. We're going to use that symbolism, we're going to pull it into our magical energy, and we're going to flow with it. And that's how it feels every single year when we make the shift, I swear. And every single year I'm like, oh, thank goodness. I'm much more of a flowy person, I think, despite being Virgo, but there you go. I love the idea of the self-expression of ourselves through art, music, song and poetry. And I think that's very important in part and parcel of the Celtic pantheon. I've talked about prophetic poetry a couple of times, and it's actually a conversation I had recently one-on-one with someone about the potency and power of prophetic poetry. More tongue twisters, we're doing good. And it's a Morrigan-based thing for me, obviously, but she delivered a lot of her messages in prophetic form through poetry, and it was a form of telling the future. It's very much tied up in her sorceress aspect, and there the two become intertwined in a form of witchcraft, about being a sorceress who predicts the future using poetry and words and divine inspiration. And some people do this by allowing the energies of god or goddess to flow through them, and they do it with instinctive writing. And then I sort of get that through the idea of poetry. I have poetry flow through me and it just comes into being. And part of it is me, and then part of it is sort of divinely inspired, and it becomes a form of magic within itself. And it's a really interesting process to take part in. And I think it might be really interesting to incorporate Hazel into that prophetic poetry process, perhaps eating Hazel prior, or focusing on one of the images, or incorporating it into the energies somehow. So that's wish magic and healing magic. Is there anything else I wanted to really discuss? Dum 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 bum. I think it's very interesting about how certain trees affect us on a different level when they have a part of them which is consumed by the human being. And interestingly enough, the consumption of the hazelnut by the salmon sort of reflects this in Celtic lore, because this is sort of a thing that people could do that would tie them to those myths. You know, the salmon of wisdom ate the hazelnut, and if we incorporate hazelnut in our diet, we're following the old way, or the lore passed down in Celtic tradition. And I find the consumption of particular ogham in particular ogham and their fruit or nut or seed fascinating, because it's all very much tied into the idea of, by consuming a thing, you are taking the energy of it into yourself and appropriating that energy. And that is a huge part of Celtic mythology in a lot of ways. The most obvious way that I can think of is a little bit morbid, obviously, but it's the carrion eaters, the crows, from the battlefields, were visions of Morrigan, her animal, that consumed the human being, and in Celtic mythology and in the mindset, consume their soul in order to transform them and transmute them to the other side, to carry them to the other world and on to the next stage of life. And that sort of thing pops up here, there and everywhere within Celtic mythology. That's the most obvious one to me that I can really recall straight off the cuff. But that sort of thing is fascinating, and I think it's always interesting to me that the ones that we are able to consume not only seem to pop up a lot more with regards to hearth and home and earthy energy, for obvious reasons. I was mentioning this earlier as well about kitchen witchery, having a slight discussion on that as a medium. Kitchen witchery tends to get a little bit overlooked by people. I think it's a shame. I think cooking and food is one of the most fascinating of human experiences when you really sit and think about it. There's a whole culture behind food. There's this whole process that, you know, there's books and television programs and all sorts devoted to the art of learning to cook and flavors, and then there's a whole social aspect tied in about cooking for other people and showing you know, your family and bonding with people around the dinner table. And there's so much history and lore tied into the food aspect of life, breaking bread, of sharing a meal, and that's in every culture and in every spiritual path. It's there, right down to, you know, cake and ale in ritual with regards to the sort of more pagan, that's slightly Wiccan, more Wiccan probably, but there is quite often a consumption of an element within all witchy magical paths, and I find the whole thing fascinating. And some people are kind of dismissive of cooking magic, but I think it's really interesting because it's something that we can all do quite readily and easily, and if we just incorporate our magical abilities into it, it becomes infused with our witchy sense of style rather than just being a mundane thing. And that's kind of the lesson of Hazel anyway, that you should be infusing every day some healing magic or creative magic full stop into your daily process. And I think food is one of the easiest ways to incorporate any magic, but for our purposes here, Ogham and Hazel, into your magical workings. And I find that fascinating. I think that's really interesting that, you know, I could use a little bit of hazelnut in this cake that I'm creating, say, just like I'm not, but say I was. Or, you know, if you're making hazelnut bread, or I don't know, anything that you were doing. I prefer spices personally. I like my spicier foods. So, but it's really interesting, isn't it, how we incorporate all these things and without even thinking about it. And if we just pushed a little bit more, if we put that energy in a little bit more, if we put that visualization in a little bit more to, say, cooking or everyday items, then we're making every day a bit more witchy, which is surely a noble pursuit as well. So that's going to be it for this video about Hazel. I shall have a think about what kind of magical working we can do. Not cooking, I don't think. But I'll have a look at it and see what we can create. Many blessings.